Actually, let me flip on my lights.
Boom. We're live.
Come back.
There you go.
All right, better.
Patrick, how you doing?
I'm doing well, John. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on, man. Well, first of all, to all the people that message me, I got a lot of DMs and stuff, and I used to do this like a year ago. I used to do this more often, where I would just say, like, going live in 10 minutes, who wants to jump on a stream, just to get to know the less well-known Bitcoiners out there, right? Because there's so many. But to all those that reached out, I'll work my way through it. I don't know why I stopped doing these things, but they're super fun, and you end up connecting with great people. So I think I'm going to do more of them. But you hit me up and you mentioned that you had a number of interests, and we were just kind of talking about how a lot of the interests around or held by Bitcoiners seem to overlap these days, and maybe particularly obvious in the last 18 months. So I don't know where you want to get this kicked off. Maybe your rabbit hole story is the best place to start, and we'll take it from there.
For sure. Okay, my rabbit hole story is going to be probably similar to a lot of people's. Actually, there's those four frameworks that VJ has laid out. The four frameworks for understanding Bitcoin. Of you first come to it. The first framework is this thing is made up. It's internet money. These people are crazy. It is worth $0. Your next framework is, okay, these weird libertarian-minded people like this weird asset. It's like Esperanto. They assign it a certain value. Your next group of people say, okay, I see the comparison to gold. They assign it a value with it supplanting gold. Then you have your, I guess we'll call it maximalists, who would say, look, this is the base layer monetary system of the world, and infinite number go up. So what brought me in was probably 2017. Actually, maybe the first time I heard about it, I think Ross Ulbricht went to high school at Westlake High School here in Austin, which is like a stone's throw from my office. So I'd heard about the Silk Road when that happened. It was kind of like people in this area talked about this kid who went to high school here, and he got caught up in bad stuff. And, I heard the word Bitcoin, and I just thought, that's bizarre. And I didn't really think much about it. But I would say before that, my rabbit hole probably started with Ron Paul in 2008. I started, I'm an attorney, but I started reading Henry Hazlitt, Hayek, all these things, and it really resonated with me. And, the gold bug thing, when he talked about sound money, I didn't know what that meant. And I just read, just curious, reading about it, and it resonated. It made sense. It seemed logical. And, so then bring it up to 2017. I played around with gold a little bit, held on to it, and never really thought much of it. Guns and gold. That's what it is in Texas. And so 2017, the price is appreciating rapidly with Bitcoin. It's in the news. So I just, number go up. I'm going to go buy this thing. It's going to go up, and I'm going to sell it to some sucker when it at the top. So I rode this thing from, maybe I go in at 9,000. It goes to 20. And in that, I bought Litecoin and Ripple, right? It goes up to 20. The whole thing crashes. I never sold anything. I just held it all. So I don't know the next entry point. And then I had a Coinbase account, never touched it again. Never messed with it. That Bitcoin and Litecoin and what Ripple sat there. Then I came across the Bitcoin Standard, the book. I don't know when would that come out? Late 18, early 19?
Late 18, I think it was. Or maybe
it was around December.
Was it late 17? No, maybe late 18. Yeah, I can't remember.
I don't remember, but I read that book, and it was like a light bulb moment of like, wow, these are serious people. Like, this is not just like, they're people that really believe this, and they view this like people view gold. And of course, Safety is so like pointed in his criticism of altcoins that, like, just out of shame, I immediately sold all my Litecoin and all the Ripple, of just like, what am I doing? And at the time too, I recall having, I still have a gold and silver, and I sold all my silver because he's like, oh, that's the original shitcoin is silver. And just out of shame, I sold this stuff. So from there, then another big deal for me. So read Bitcoin Standard, got an understanding of it, acquired a little more Bitcoin. Then in like, let's call it 2020, early 2020, pre-pandemic, again, I've been lurking on Bitcoin Twitter. And throughout this time, I think Bitcoin Twitter was super helpful in cycling through like your handle. And I follow Safe, and then I, find Stefan Lavara, and things started to come online of podcasts, your podcast, other people's, Pompliano kind of, I think is probably a big entry point for a lot of people, but Stefan Lavara, Preston Pish, like just started consuming this stuff. And I don't know if this is just this big feedback loop, but it is what it is. And it really resonated with me. So I reached out. I've never done this before. I DM'd Parker Lewis on Twitter because I saw that he's in Austin. And I was like, hey man, I live in Austin. Do you still live here? I want to meet a human being. Like all these people talk about this online. Like I've never met another human that owned Bitcoin. And so my wife was like, what are you doing? Like reaching out to a stranger on Twitter, like you're going to meet this person? Like, is this safe? So I met him at Cooper's Barbecue, which, anybody in the Austin Bitcoin community is very familiar with. He met me there for lunch, and pandemic is coming online at this point. It's like March 2020. We both kind of walked in. It was like, I don't know that people were wearing masks at this point. And we both kind of look at each other, and he's like, so we go in, have lunch at Cooper's. And then I think I've heard other people say this when they have a light bulb moment is I remember sitting there talking to him. And when I got done, I just had this panic attack of like, I don't have
enough Bitcoin.
Like I was terrified. And I thought, oh my God. I remember asking him about Matt Odell, because I'd read Matt Odell and I would say, this guy scares the shit out of me. Like he talks about privacy. Like none of this is non-KYC. Like, oh my God. And anyways, it was just really reassuring to meet him. I think I met with another guy from Parker's office, Phil Geiger, who was super helpful. And went and had coffee with them. So I think meeting a human being, meeting somebody meeting somebody was super helpful, man. Like real people. Then I saw that they have BitDevs in Austin, which I don't even know what that means. I'm not a developer. We go in and he says, come to BitDevs. I go to BitDevs in Austin. There's maybe, this is June maybe of 2020. So still like pandemic stuff in Austin, but to Unchained's credit, man, they still hosted this thing, like never stopped. And went there and there was 20 people there. I mean, you go there today and there's like 150. It's bonkers, right? So I think, and then of course, go through and read Layered Money. I read Andy Edstrom's book. I think Swan and Brady Swenson and Corey Klippenstein. There's just so much good content that wasn't there. And I think it's been tremendously helpful in pointing people so they can jump over, man, that like altcoin valley, the altcoin casino that is so tempting to chase.
Did you have to convince, I mean, what was, you're a rando on the internet asking Parker for lunch. Like, what was that exchange like? How did you convince him that, this was a worthwhile use of his time?
Dude, I mean, I'll tell you something else about him. He, let me see. I think it was immediate. He's like, sure, man. I'd love to meet with you. It was that simple. Then, so I met with him, and then and then I ended up becoming like full disclosure, a client of Unchained. And you kind of meet this community. Well, then I had told Parker, like, hey, I have a friend in town, another rando guy, finance guy, business school person. Would you meet with him? And Parker's like, yeah, sure. Like no questions asked. This buddy of mine was like, man, I met your buddy Parker. I was going to go to lunch with or grab coffee with him for like, 30 minutes. He's like, I've been here for 3 hours. Like this kid's blowing my mind. And then more recently, I mean, again, so hats off to, I think Marty Bent has mentioned it, but like Parker will red pill anybody and like without fail. So there's a member of Congress here in Austin who's got, we've got kids at the same school, and he, was like, man, in all fairness, like I don't understand Bitcoin. I'm prone to support the people, but I don't know I support this community. I think like there's a lot of overlap clearly with us, but I don't know anything about it. What can I do? And I called Parker, and Parker like goes and has a 2.5 hour lunch with him. So
It's like the bat signal. You throw up the Parker signal. It's like he comes running with the orange pill.
It's tough. And then more recently, and again, I think this is to the point of like getting people who did I get? I got another guy, Cam Strami here in Austin, to come and put on an event at my house. And so my wife is like, this is getting super weird. Like, you're hosting people at the house to talk about Bitcoin. But man, we had like 25 people show up, and then everybody just had a lot of and so Cam presented for 20, 30 minutes, and then like an hour and a half, 2 hours of like, I can't tell you how many people had these like, oh man, I'm going to get him here. Like, I got a gotcha question. And you're like, man, this is stuff that they've been talked about for like 4 years. Like, that question's been asked and answered. But anyways, it was a good opportunity for, like, I'd say a third of these people own Bitcoin and didn't even know why they chased a number, and they own it. And I think giving a good framework for why they own it. And so anyways, it's been good. It's like, I think the Austin community is very helpful.
Yeah. Well, we were talking right before we started about interacting with normie world, right? When the further you go down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, the more kind of divergent your typical mind, your typical thoughts are from, what populate maybe, someone in the normie world, because it's just so intellectually stimulating to think about all the different things that this thing is going to impact and influence and change. And like, as a Bitcoiner, you kind of become consumed by that, and all the regular chit chat just loses its luster,
For sure.
But you're in a great place, obviously, in Austin, possibly the best place in the world to at least be around, more Bitcoiners to sharpen, to refine your understanding. But, you seem to have kind of taken the orange pill at an interesting time. How has the Bitcoin journey influenced your thinking on things, generally speaking, especially over the course of the last 18 to 24 months?
I was just saying this to some friends the other day let's call them normies. Yeah. And so there's been a lot of space over the past 18 months, even, within friend circles, people have acted very different, anyway. So some people who I hadn't seen in a while, I mean, these are very dear friends. And I'm like, man, I think that you're going to think I'm super weird now. So yeah, man, it really has. I think one of the most ground shifting things for me was, and Saif kind of talks about this in the book, is, as a Christian, I would have looked at the world and I would say, hey, look, all these moral ills in society, like, there's one answer, the God, that's your church answer is like, man, these people need the gospel. And then I think it has really made me think no different than people maybe with a mental illness of, within a Christian framework, people would say, man, there's the only thing that can really repair these people mentally, physically, is the gospel. Well, in all fairness, like, there's some people who may need medication, right? And they may need some balance. So I think when I looked at, societal ills of divorce rates and poverty and the wealth gap and all these things, I would have looked and said, look, these people have unhappiness and they're poor because of, they're just, it's sin and the world is broken. Well, like, ignoring like medication to potentially cure some of these ills, like looking at like the base layer monetary system of the world and the inability of people to, I guess it goes back to the whole WTF in 1971, like what happened there that has caused all this. And it all seems to generally like come back to, people not being able to save. I mean, you can't build a society on spending. I think a lot of the riots, I think somebody made, it probably has made me way more purple in my, I get in the States, it's red and blue, and then people in the middle, they call them purple. I have definitely gone politics. How about this? Politics to me is perhaps the biggest distraction in the world. And it's something that, like, just selfishly I get sucked into, and it burns so much bandwidth. And then and I've seen this kind of tussle in the libertarian community of like Bitcoiners being like, guys, like, you're playing grandpa's game here. Like that politics and voting, all these things, there's a deeper fundamental problem here. So I'm not really answering your question. Was what has shifted? I think a lot. I have a hard time putting it in words, and honestly, like, listening to your podcast with Francis or Alec, y'all put these into words much better than I can, like way more eloquently. It's hard to grip, but when I hear these podcasts, I'm like, oh, that's exactly what I've been trying to say, but never been able to put into words.
Yeah, well, we have a lot more practice, I guess, is at least part of that thing. When you brought up Christianity there, and in the DM you sent me, one of the ways you used to describe yourself was a reformed theologist. Can you maybe describe for me what that means?
Okay. I think people look back, the first reformer, Luther, and so his splitting with the Catholic Church caused I think the Catholic Church, there's a lot of good things that they offer in the way of tradition. And so they point at Protestants and say, man, you guys keep fracturing over these, the Catholic Church can say, look, we've had the same church that's been here since the beginning, and it has, and we've held it together more or less. And Protestants, well, y'all become Presbyterians, and then you're Reformed Presbyterians, and you're Orthodox, and then you've got all these different. So Reformed theology, I would say a lot of people would point back to John Calvin, Ulrich Zwingli, and it is just a framework of how is best to put it. I think the easiest thing is like there's a principle within or not a principle, an idea within Scripture of election versus free will, and there's this tension in Scripture of like, hey, Jesus says, I want everybody to come to me, but then there's some exclusivity, some exclusive statements of like, I'm going to separate the wheat from the chaff, and I'm going to burn these vines, and like there's some scary stuff in there. And man, I'm butchering what Reformed theology is here.
Well, if you want, I can reframe the question, because you touched on how this understanding of the base layer of society, which I think we would probably agree is money, has influenced your perception of what some of the societal ills are and how they might be ameliorated, right? So whereas before you might have reached for the religious explanation, for lack of a better term, to say, oh, well, you need more of X, Y, Z in your life, this understanding has led you to feel like, oh, well, actually, perhaps before we go into that realm and domain, let's fix the problems that have been created by this corrupt base layer, i.e. the money. Let's see what remains after that, and then we can move into the spiritual realms or whatever. And I've been I've been thinking about this issue a lot lately and trying to put into words my thoughts on it. There's two things I think occurring. One is, I think some of the principles that exist at the base layer of many faiths around the world seem to me to be instantiated in Bitcoin in certain ways, perhaps most profoundly in the fact that Bitcoin is an incorruptible truth. It also is something that sanctifies the divinity of each individual. And those two ideas, I think, are very central to a lot of the faiths around the world. The other thing that's happening is it seems to be inspiring a renewed interest by previously atheist, agnostic, whatever people to re-examine these schools of religious thought for the insights and wisdom that they might be able to extract and then apply to their understanding of Bitcoin. And that's a really far out notion, because why the hell would that be happening? Why are you looking into these systems of faith and explaining the nature of reality and how people should act in it? What makes you compelled to look there for insights that you can apply to a magic internet money, a digital protocol on the internet? So that phenomenon, I encounter it all the time in my conversations with Bitcoiners, and I'm trying to understand why that is. But I'm just curious, from your perspective, has an understanding of Bitcoin changed, revivified, altered your perception of the religious enterprise, the pursuit of that type of knowledge?
Yeah, I mean, I would say absolutely. And again, I'm going to struggle to put into words. But there is the, what we call the orange pill, or, the matrix red pill. There's parallels, I think, like the ultimate, so a Christian would say the ultimate red pill is resurrection, right? And so we would say, nobody examines the Bible like this, but let's say you start in Genesis and you read the Revelation book by book. It's a beast. It's maybe you get through Deuteronomy and you're like, I'm out. A tough read. So most people start in the Gospels. But if you were to start in the Old Testament, and throughout the Old Testament, there's prophecies about the Christ, and when you get there, it's much like in The Sixth Sense when you realize Bruce Willis is dead. You can't ever see that movie the same again. And so the Old Testament, so Christ dies, Christ resurrects. You can't ever read the Old Testament the same way you read it that first time, because people may disagree, but you're going to go back to the book of Isaiah and you'll be like, oh, they were talking about Christ, like all these things were fulfilled in Christ. So you can't go back and read the Bible. You can't ever look at the Bible the same again. It fundamentally changes your view of the world again. You can't ever go back and watch The Sixth Sense like you did the first time, because that first time you didn't know he's dead, and you go through and you'll never unsee it. And so much like Bitcoin, once you have that panic moment of, oh, these are serious people, and this is a very real thing, and there are all these problems and ills in society that maybe I've attributed to other things, I can't unsee it. And it's hard to really put into words to other people, what they're not seeing. I mean, I think Parker was like, hey man, when you're bringing people here, if they're just like closed off to this idea altogether, like, and I know that Pierre Rochard and they talk about Bitcoin as a religion, but in the same way, like when you're evangelizing somebody, you're talking to somebody about a system of faith, if they have no framework or understanding to it, it typically is they've got to come to you. Like there just has to be a trigger point that they say, okay, I see what you're seeing. There just has to be these trigger points that they're going to say, okay, John, I heard what John said about this, and but yeah, so has it made me re-examine these things? Yeah, I think people want things that are true, and there's truth within Bitcoin, right? Like it is fixed. There's no ruler, and there's a protocol by which we all abide. And again, I think it just causes how about this? Just like, as I re-examine all these ills, and so I had a very negative view of like the BLM movement, just naturally out of my political persuasions of like, these people are just violent thugs, and they, and there may be an element of that within them, but then you're like, a more thoughtful way would be like, well, dude, what's really going on here? Or, that whole deal at the Capitol on January 6th, like, instead of just like wanting to, so I demonize BLM, like people would demonize the people, and saying like, what's really this unrest? And again, I would say the unrest is this, they don't know how to explain it. They don't know that their energy is getting sucked away out from underneath them, and they can't get ahead. And so when you take that pill and you realize like, man, I had this framed all wrong. Here's one of the most bitter pills I've swallowed is I remember in 2002, 2003, we're going to war with Iraq. I'm from Texas. I had friends that worked in the Bush administration, like rah, 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 let's go get these guys. And all those people, all those, degenerate hippies who are laying on Congress Avenue in Austin, and they were right and I was wrong. Like they got that right. And so that's a bitter pill for like a, white middle upper class guy like me to be able to say, man, I got that totally wrong. Like completely hoodwinked. And these people got it right. So what are some other things that like I have? I think it just makes me question more and more things. And so like the whole Corona thing, you're just like, guys, like go a couple levels deeper here, like start asking questions instead of just jumping to conclusions. And like Bitcoin requires more like a very inquisitive or a curious person. And it rewards like that curiosity and honest curiosity of trying to find something out.
Yeah, I think that's part of the religious association, and definitely not all of it. There's way more to it. But part of it is that it somehow instills a fairly profound change in perception, right? And by whatever means that works, like whether it's such an unknown that it revivifies your curiosity to such an extent that it reformulates your entire perception, or at least a lot of it. Maybe it's that, maybe it's some other mechanism. But again, I think what I observe, and it applies to religious systems, it applies to trust in government, corporations, systems of thought, academia. I mean, this is the orange pill in saying that everything needs to be reconstructed rather, in my mind, because I allowed myself to be conditioned or convinced or otherwise misled on a lot of different things. And somehow this incorruptible form of base layer truth is the foundation upon which I'll reconstruct my perception. And that means everything's on the table, right? It's not like I'm not making any assumptions about truth anymore. The base layer of truth has been established. Let's brick by brick reconstruct it. And so that means you look at government, you look at geopolitics, you look at medicine, you look at academia with fresh eyes. And when you do, in a world that currently the base layer is a corrupt base layer, well, what do you know? You come up with the conclusion that most of it is corrupt or fraudulent or dishonest in some way, shape, or form. And that's why Bitcoiners, I think, seem so divergent from the status quo culture. And I guess, technically they are, but not in the sense, like you mentioned, BLM protesters, for example. I think we'd all sympathize with them and say, we know that feeling that something is wrong, something feels incongruent, but they are probably latching on to a higher level symptom or assuming a higher level cause and reacting to that in probably a not super constructive way, rather than getting to the root of the problem and trying to fix it from there first and build up from there. And so that's what makes this all so interesting to me. It's like everything is on the table to be redefined and reconstructed now, which is somewhat daunting. But if you're a curious person and if you actually care, if you actually want to know how things work in the philosophical, economic, political, technological domain, few things could be more invigorating, because you're like, wow, like the world is renewed in a certain sense.
Yeah. And you always hear the thing of like Bitcoin, like you just have to approach it with humility. Right. And coincidentally, I think like Christ was pretty clear on like, man, those who humble themselves will be exalted. Those who exalt themselves are going to be humbled. And so in the same way, coming to it with a sense of like, hey, I don't really have all the answers. And take I think there was an article, I think it was called why the rich yuppie elite don't get Bitcoin. I don't know if you've read that article.
I think that was Croesus, right?
Yes. Yeah. So when I read that, I mean, I thought of the vaccine, why the rich yuppie elite don't get the vaccine, it's kind of that midwit, or why rich yuppie elite typically, don't get the gospel, right? It's always very poor, it's that, the bell curve midwit, right. Christianity only appeals to really poor, uneducated people. Why? Well, why is that? They don't have the distractions of life, and they are, they need a daily bread, and they're reliant upon something, whether they know it or not. I think and I don't know Peterson's status, but I've heard him say I approach the world as if God does exist. So in that, he's approaching the world just through humility of like, there's something bigger than me, and it's impossible for me to have all the answers. And that humility drives a curiosity, and it drives like a curiosity about everything, to your point. Like you kind of question everything, and your pragmatist may say, well, man, isn't that exhausting? Like, do you ever trust anything? What is it? Everybody not related to you by blood is trying to kill you. That's kind of my response.
But I think this is part of the reason why we see and again, I'm generalizing, and some people don't like that, but a type of minimalization happening in amongst Bitcoiners, where like you refine your life down to what is either
Yeah.
known or of high value or very important. And everything else, whether because of uncertainty around its purpose or value, or because it's lower down on the hierarchy of values, it ends up getting pushed out. Now, in the financial realm, this is partially because, well, do I want that frivolous expense or do I want more sats? Well, I want more sats, so I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna spend on that frivolous thing. But I think it also operates on a, let's say, a non-financial or non-physical scale, where because our minds are being restructured toward placing a higher emphasis on our own conviction around the truth of everything we engage in, it necessitates that we remove the things that are still highly questionable until such time we can revisit them and reintegrate them to whatever degree we think is rational or necessary. And this is kind of like the Bitcoin Zen meme or whatever. Like when the optionality for your future is stored in an incorruptible manner that is going to be there for you. And as a result, your anxiety toward the future is dialed down, right? You don't have as much uncertainty around the future. And then you're able to focus on the things of higher meaning and value in your daily life. Well, that almost naturally dissolves things that are less valuable and less meaningful. And your life maybe becomes simpler, but richer. That's the thing. And so many Bitcoiners, if you ask them like, well, what do you see in your future? Well, I want a pretty simple future. I want to live in a natural environment. I want to build a family. I want to eat good food. I want to take care of my health. I want to have good relationships. It's like, that's all pretty simple stuff, but it's so rich and meaningful that it gets pushed way up in the ambition and objectives for a lot of those people.
I wholeheartedly agree. And I think, again, it really goes back to time. And I'm curious, what was the whole high time preference, low time preference? Was SAFE kind of the first to put it in those two terms? Like, the principles have always been around, the marshmallow test.
Yeah, but I honestly don't know.
Yeah, I mean, the way it's referenced now, everybody who says high time preference or low time preference invariably has read that book. So that's what I would put it with. But to your point about, hey, what are the things you aspire to have? The things of lasting value and meaning, as opposed to whatever's cheapest on Amazon at the moment. A question I've thought about is like, what was the last purchase I made that, man, I'm going to give to my children? Like, I think we consume so much. I've got three girls. We consume so much. How do we, what's going to last? I think that is what I'm more drawn to. And, when coming from a system of faith, obviously what's lasting to me is a relationship with Christ for my kids. That to me is preeminent, right? Beyond that, I want them to be resourceful kids, things that add value to other people's life. But a kid that's never going to ask how to do something, they're going to at least tinker and try to figure out first. That to me is like I want those kids to be like, hey man, those kids those kids love Jesus, and those kids they're resourceful and they're Bitcoiners. But I think that is important of building these things. Now, are you a hunter? Am I right on that?
I've hunted. I went on my first hunt 2 years ago, I think.
Okay.
It's something I'd been putting off for a long time, but I will be for the remainder of my life when given the opportunity.
Yeah.
For sure.
So when you go through, man, I think this is so deep seated, and I think when you've had, is it Joel from Untapped Growth? Yeah, dude, your interview with him, perhaps it was a big eye opener. I sent that thing far and wide to a lot of people because not even just the Bitcoin principles, but just this idea that, man, our separation from the natural world has fundamentally shaped how we view life altogether. And man, you look at the parables in the Bible, and you plant a seed, you water it, you nurture it, and in due time, somewhere down the road, this will bear fruit. And so there's just a long time, as opposed to, man, you can get fresh strawberries year round anywhere on the planet through Amazon. There is no sitting and waiting and Where do steaks come from? Steaks come from the market. Like, no, do they come from an animal that had to give its life for you to eat? And you've got to go and sit and wait. And, you're taking a life to add to the flourishment of life. And there's just this connection that's been severed, that I think really fundamentally the sacredness of life, like, we don't value animal life. Man, look, if you don't value human life, you're not going to value animal life. And there's just this warped circle that I can't quite put into words. I think that is
yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, our technological mastery and the conveniences that it's established in our life have in many cases removed us from meaning, right? Like, as you say, when you can go into a grocery store and pick up the strawberries or the beef or whatever bullshit, cereal or whatever the hell else it might be, and be completely untethered from an understanding of where it comes from, the sacrifices involved, the time, the energy, the labor, the miracle of life that's involved in all of that fundamentally, and the meaning that's attached to that. When you're totally cut off from that, like I feel like we end up in fiat world, like we always talk about, right? Fiat world is that world that's so detached from the meaning of the things we engage with. And as a result, people end up living meaningless lives or less meaningful lives. And yeah, I think hunting is, and again, one of the reasons why I think it's making having a resurgence or emerging in the consciousness of Bitcoiners, is because it's like you become face to face reconnected with that sacrifice. And to me, what it instills is not only are you taking responsibility. Well, let's say more than like the animal lived a nice, natural, healthy life, wasn't in a feedlot, all that kind of stuff. But I don't want to take life unnecessarily. I value life, and I think life is beautiful. But if I'm going to do it because I believe it's the best way to sustain my life, implicit in that is an assumption that my life is worth sustaining. And I want to prove that assumption correct. And the only way I can do that is by being extremely grateful for the sacrifice that the animal made, and then making sure that in my life, this might sound a bit cheesy, but like, how do I prove that it was like a legitimate sacrifice to be made on behalf of the animal? Well, I think I have to bring into the world more goodness than, let's say, the animal could have in a kind of a weird way. Like, I have to amplify the goodness, the divinity, the life force of that animal through me in order to justify that sacrifice.
I mean, here's peak fiat is in my home, and in my bedroom, my wife, we have a zebra like throw rug. Like, first off, I don't know if this thing's even real. Secondly, it's just like, I didn't kill this thing. God knows where it came from. Like that it came from, I think they say there's more zebras in Texas than there are, there's all these exotic animals in Texas. There's more here than there are in Africa. But it just is this reminder to me of like, I didn't kill this thing. Like, I walk on it every day. Like, what am I doing? Like, this is just silly.
But I think this is, we're just obviously at the very beginning of all this, but I think Bitcoin being almost, again, the relationship to religion, it's like, it's a principle, a value that is so high up on the hierarchy of values that it helps judge and evaluate all subordinate values and things that you might encounter. And this is why it informs so much how you move through the world, because moving through the world is just always confronting a contrast of choices, and your value system is what allows you to choose one or the other and move in this direction versus that. And what I see emerging is, like, because of Bitcoin, or at least in part, is that a value judgment for everything in life. And this is kind of going back to that point about the minimalist thing. And I think in the future, minimalist may be a bit of a strong word, but there will be such a high emphasis placed on quality, and not just like quality of craftsmanship, but like, what is the meaning and the relationship behind the things that you introduce into your life? So, and the reason why your rug example made me think of it is because, like, most like, in my opinion, in the future, people won't say that as much. They'll be like, if this is in my home, I know why it's there. I know where it came from. It has some deeper meaning to me than just it matched the black and white curtains and I bought it at the Pier 1 or whatever, whatever place,
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I think that is, there's also a balance of like, I have a wife who has a good framework for Bitcoin, but she's definitely not like, let's get rid of all this stuff.
Well, we're all trying to balance our insane orange pilledness with the people in our lives that we have to cooperate and live with, right? And I think, it's great when there's couples that are both super orange pilled, but most often there's a little bit of a difference between the two. And I think that's to be expected in this phase that we're in. And, people often ask, do you think everyone will ultimately be like an orange pilled Bitcoiner and be as restructured as we are? Or will most people simply de facto accept it as money and not be as transformed by it? And I kind of oscillate between the two. On the one hand, you say, no, of course not. Not everyone's going to be so impacted. They'll just use it as money. They'll get on with their lives. They won't think about it that much, just like money today.
Right.
But I do think there is a propensity, because of Bitcoin's qualities, that it does slowly grind away on you and change you, even in mostly subconscious ways. So a lot of people, I guess ultimately I think not everyone will become like a super orange pill Bitcoiner, but I do almost think some impact of using a sound money in the relation and how it changes your relationship to value and your relationship to the future. I think that's almost inescapable, that it will nudge you and shape you in certain ways.
I would agree with that. I think that article, I don't know how to pronounce his name, Svetsky, the Remnant.
Yeah.
I mean, I think if I
Svetsky, the Remnant.
Yeah. But that article on the Remnant where he talks about Isaiah's job, man, I think that resonated with me in that, like, so I may fall in the camp of like, I think he ultimately says in that, like, everyone's going to use this, like, they'll just never know they're using it. They don't have the curiosity or the patience to like really deep. I mean, who says this? Like, maybe it was Saylor. He's like, do you think these people have spent more than an hour researching this stuff? He's like, man, I've spent thousands of hours doing this. Like, he has a deep understanding. I put myself into hundreds of hours. It's, of reading about it. Back to spouses and making sure that we're not crazy. Man, a major win for me was like at church maybe 2 months ago. All of a sudden, like, Jimmy Song walks into do you know Jimmy?
Yeah.
Okay. He showed up in my church, and I was like, so we go to church together now. But his wife, my wife meeting him and like seeing another normal person was like, and then hosting that at my house, like, huge win, right? I mean, a really well-spoken, normal person. She's like, okay, this isn't as fringe as I had thought. Okay. Like, jumping back real quick, as it relates to, we said, questioning our assumptions and what has been really interesting. One thing within, and I mentioned this briefly. So I'm an attorney, and we do asbestos litigation, we do pharmaceutical litigation, all these types of things. So for the past 15 years, I've gone to these conferences in Las Vegas, and the premise of these conferences are, I mean, the trial attorney world, the plaintiff's attorney world is like a very progressive, left-leaning profession with the United States. Large businesses do not like plaintiff's attorneys who are doing this. But so, man, year after year, when we go to these things, the theme of all these conferences, pharmaceutical companies cannot be trusted. They're putting profits over people. They're bad, such and such, right? Like, they're bad. And so, like, I've been brainwashed to think this, and that's what I've done. And I can tell you, like, wholeheartedly, man, like, we're currently litigating something that this company has known about since 2002. And like, doctors were warning about this, and a surgeon approached us in Austin, was like, y'all need to look into this drug. We do it. And sure enough, like, this company has ignored these problems for like 18 years. So
I'm
back
not
to this
surprised.
conference, we had this conference coming up, and, it'd been canceled the past 2 years. and they're requiring us to be vaccinated to go to this thing. And I just, the cognitive dissonance of like, well, guys, like, we're suing Pfizer and multiple other torts. We're suing Johnson and Johnson. Like, I thought you said these guys can't be trusted and they're evil. And it just, to me, the political red-blue divide of like, now they're saying, well, I mean, we know they're evil, but I mean, in this regard, we're going to have you do this. It's pretty fascinating.
Oh, it's absolutely insane. I mean, the in my opinion, the whole world is under some form of psychosis, hysteria, whatever you want to call it. But the cognitive dissonance is so great that I think you have to describe it as something pathological. Now, in the Bitcoin space, and beyond, for those people that see that, all you can do is throw up your hands and call it clown world, because otherwise you get too angry by it because it's so absurd.
So and I would say, being probably in Texas and Florida, these two places, I can't think of anywhere I'd rather
lucky,
be.
man. Yeah.
But in the midst of this, I think something that was compelling to me is there's a few people on Bitcoin Twitter who talk about, hey man, you may want another passport, you may want to like leave. And so I went to my first Bitcoin conference this past year in Dallas at BitBlock Boom, and I met Francis, which was awesome. Like, the guy's such a character. And so like I had a million questions for him, but I think maybe he's going to deny saying this, but he was like, look, ultimately, like, if Texas goes, like, there's nowhere to go. I mean, more or less, like, there's no sense in looking in Costa Rica or in other countries. Like, dude, like, Texas is the last hill to die on here. And like Parker Lewis would probably say the same thing.
Well, it's hard to argue. I mean, it's crazy how sparse the options are in the world for a little bit of freedom. A little bit of. Yeah? No, I left in the end of May.
Okay, so you're States, or are you in the States?
No, I'm in Central and South America at the moment.
Okay, all right, yeah.
But it's true, man. Like, I mean, if all you want is a little self-determination in this life, which I don't think is much to ask, you got to be in Texas, Florida, Idaho, Wyoming, red state US right now.
Yeah.
And even those places, I mean, they're coming for you, and it's good that it's good that some people are standing up for freedom. And in the US, I mean, this is somewhat of a contentious issue. Well, it's a very contentious issue all over the world, but it's amazing to me. Well, and people don't realize the importance because there's so much hysteria going on and psychosis of various kinds, but people don't understand the importance of the ability of the citizenry to resist the government, right? Yeah. And that's why the Second Amendment is there, right? And so even though you have all these checks and balances and perhaps the most brilliantly constructed system of governance ever, there was a recognition it can still go astray. And if it does, there needs to be a final check on the balance of power of government, and that is an armed citizenry. And every other country in the world, pretty much, I can't think of any that have as liberal gun rights and laws as the United States, seem to discredit that notion and believe that it's not very important. But red states in the US, Texas being perhaps chief among them, do get it. And I think that's why freedom-loving people that desire freedom and understand the importance of freedom are flocking there right now. And so I think Francis is probably right about that, because everything else is let's put it this way. Rights aren't rights. They're temporary permissions unless they can be defended. If they can be defended, then they can be maintained. But if they can't be, then it's possible that they're just temporary permissions.
Okay, yeah. So the Ernst Younger, how about this? To that very point, I saw this morning. Long periods of peace and quiet favor certain optical illusions. Among them is the assumption that the invulnerability of the home is founded upon the Constitution and safeguarded by it. To your point, in reality, it rests upon the father of the family who, accompanied with his sons, appears at the threshold of his dwelling with an axe. You're right. And now I do wonder, if, I don't know, I genuinely, like, that remnant thing struck me because you'd be shocked how many like conservative minded people. I mean, granted, I'm in Austin, it's a little more progressive, but like really conservative minded people just like willy-nilly, I don't know. I don't know. I think that number
Willy-nilly
is,
what?
just willy-nilly were like, didn't ever give it a second thought. Like these are people who like who even had COVID, right? They were sick. And then once that thing came around, they're like, and it wasn't done because like, I really think I need this. Overwhelmingly, the sentiment was like, it'll make things easier. And I'm like, man, like, I don't know. That just struck me so bad.
Well, man, I think this circumstance and people's behavior amidst it will be pointed to in the future of just the extent of the thoughtless submission and compliance that the fiat world precipitated, let's say.
Yeah, for sure.
Because it's so thoughtless. There's so little thought and discourse around these extremely important these extremely important decisions. And I mean, we exist in a world where the discourse, the questions are no longer even allowed. I mean, how many more red alarm bells do you need when asking the questions and having the discourse is no longer permitted? I mean, that should tell any even partially thinking person that something has gone terribly awry. And yet, seemingly a huge portion of the world has absolutely no problem with it. And not just no problem with it, but is happy, even enthusiastic, to jump on the bandwagon to condemn the desire to have dialogue around the most important decisions we make as individuals and as a society. Yeah, that's when you know things are dangerously wrong.
Man, yeah. I think there's the Australian, I never know which, how that works down there. There was the most recent one where he was saying, hey man, if you're vaccinated and you're against mandates, like
you're an anti-vaxxer.
Like, man, like that
with full crazy in his eyes, right? Like you could tell this person, like, yeah, exactly.
It's unhinged, and it really unhinges people. And so how to navigate all that, I mean, I tread lightly, because again, like people don't think clearly on this stuff.
I think you have to be a thoughtful operator in this period of time, because it is a very precarious time, and it could easily become a very dangerous time. And being considerate about how you maneuver through it is very important. I mean, again, to Francis's point, I mean, I think you're in the best possible place you could be for many of the reasons we covered, but a lot of people don't have that advantage or that option. And, there's obviously a scrambling going on to try to preserve freedom and promote it in various ways. But let me ask you this, because tied up in all this, and I've talked about this a little bit on the pod and experienced it on a daily basis myself, like there's this extreme hope, right, that is represented by Bitcoin and what it can foster for the future of humanity. Simultaneously, there's a growing recognition, not that, I mean, we all had always talked about this, but like realizing you're in the transition period, going from, a world full of dishonesty and lies and fraud, et cetera, to one more grounded in truth, and ultimately far better on the back end, more peaceful, more prosperous, all that kind of stuff that we often talk about. But it's almost like we were conditioned, we grew up, we developed in, for a broad term, say the fiat world. Yeah. So many of the signals that we've used to construct who we are came from the fiat world, and were somewhat distorted, perverted, however you want to characterize them. And as a result, we as individuals are not who we might become in a different world, in a different culture. And so I think, at least from my perspective, what I'm experiencing now is even, and I've lived my life trying to, align with truth and freedom and construct my own perspective and reduce the degree to which I've been susceptible to conditioning, but you can't eliminate it entirely. And what I'm feeling is like, wow, I'm not yet prepared for this degree of chaos, let's say, but I recognize that if we're going to see this through to the other end, we probably will have to adapt and deal with the frustrations, the anxieties, the discomfort of becoming different people on the other side of this, such that we can build or be a part of a more, again, lack of a better word, sane world. Like, let's say a hyper Bitcoinized world. Like, what I'm trying to get at is the emotional tension involved in what's happening right now, seeing a brighter future, but also witnessing, let's say, the collapse of the existing world to varying degrees.
For sure. And I would say, contrasting, not that I ever went to a gold conference, but gold bugs with Bitcoiners, and everybody says this, is like Bitcoiners are hyper optimistic about the future. And, gold bugs, and maybe it's just because they're older people, I don't know, but, they're just dour, and they're like, well, our best days are behind us, and like, at least we'll have gold and like guns and we can just survive. I'm like, dude, I don't like that future, man. Like, give me something to aspire. Like, I've got kids, I want to hope for something better. And again, okay, so your point of like, hey, we have been like fundamentally, Bitcoin is disorienting because it's a rewiring of like so many things that you've been brought up to think. Like, for 40 years, I thought a certain way. For the past 2 years, like I really have been, past 4 years, but 2 years primarily, like really rewiring some thinking. And so here's a question for you. In fear of not getting too like confirmation bias, because again, the Bitcoiners, we all listen to a lot of the same stuff.
Yeah.
What are, and I try, I'm trying to go back and think, what are some things you got dead wrong? Like, and I'm not even talking about life issues, but like, here's something stupid. Like, I remember the first time I ever heard about someone owning a Kindle and reading a book on a Kindle. I was like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. I would never do it. Now that's what I read, right? Or you want me to hop into an Uber with somebody who like is driving around in their car? Like, that's ridiculous. And, I was dead wrong on that. And are there, because I think I view Bitcoin as one of these things of like, the people that don't get it, I'm like, dude, you are just so wrong on this. Like, and I'm so right. So I do appreciate that. And I think Breed Love is good about, I think Bitcoiners are tend to be honest people, like looking for, because it seems so apparent to me, like I have to be missing something. What am I getting wrong about this? And, I don't want to like, go Jim Jones style, but I don't know. Well, yeah, for you, can you think back on things that like, you're like, man, I was like the Warranted Rock, like, man, I was dead wrong on that. And they're bitter pills to swallow.
Yeah, it's a great question. And speaking of Rob, like he has asked me before, like everything, or said, quoting someone else, but everything comes into the world with a curse, right? And so what is Bitcoin's curse? And that's an interesting question too, a little bit different than the one you're asking. This is going to sound uber douchey, but like I can't think of anything that I was super wrong about, but it may just be because I typically don't develop like super strong opinions on things until maybe they're more apparently true. But the thing that I think about most is like, is this, if we're right about Bitcoin, then none of us are even close to being bullish is the wrong word, but appreciating the impact it's going to have if we're right about it.
Yeah.
If we're wrong about it, then we're spectacularly wrong. And I think a lot of us would think like the world is in a jam if we're wrong, because doesn't seem to be other solutions to rectifying some of the issues that we face. I have a piece around that because I think a lot of us are contributing to this or using this or believing in this for really noble reasons, right? For reasons of truth and freedom and peace and prosperity and equality and that kind of stuff. And so I think even if we are spectacularly wrong, like, well, we'll fail spectacularly, right? And there will be like some degree of, it'll be somewhat of a noble fail, let's say. But I don't know, man. I wish I could answer you, with a specific thing, but and I appreciate the risk of being in an echo chamber, but I also think that is a very appreciated risk amongst Bitcoiners, which is why every idea is scrutinized so much, and why there's such a willingness to tell people that they're fucking idiots, even if you don't like the language sometime. Like, I appreciate the sentiment, which is like, you found a hitch or a notch or a chip in that logic or that idea. Great, grind away, see what remains after the pressure is put on it. And every group of people that gets excited about something can feed into itself and maybe have blind spots. And it's almost certain that there's some blind spots here that we're not yet addressing. But the ethos of killing your heroes and being so adamant about truth and honesty is, at least in my opinion, the best approach to avoiding or mitigating the risks of blind spots.
Yeah, 100%. The kill your heroes thing is it's hilarious. Dude, you're some of the funniest people I've ever come across on Twitter. It's unbelievable how funny some people are. But yeah,
I think it's great.
Yeah, I mean, dude, you idolize somebody, they're gonna let you down, and I think I hate making too many parallels between Christianity and Bitcoin, because I'm sure that.
No, man.
But
no.
Augustine talks about the hierarchies of love, right? And if your greatest, if you've got kids and you love your kids, basically, if you're going to exalt anything, when your hierarchy loves or get out of whack, which is, God is to be your greatest love, because he's impenetrable, he's infallible, he's omnipotent, he can't be destroyed. Your job, your children, your marriage, your kids, all these things you don't see any hearses with a U-Haul behind it, right? Like, all those things are going to die. And in the same way within Bitcoin, I'm maybe making a giant logical leap here. Not that your greatest, like within this community of like approaching it with humility and not of, hey, I'm new to Bitcoin, let me tell you what I found wrong with it kind of attitude, and coming to it with like, hey, I'm going to submit to something that, like, okay, it's been around, it's been through a lot of critical analysis. So my approach to isn't one of, kind of back to what I said, is not one of pride, but one of like, okay, this is a big thing. And that's why I just kind of like shrug my shoulders when you see people approach it and I saw this when I invited people over to my home to ask questions. Everybody comes with a loaded gun of like, man, I got this. And you're like, man, just like, people do that with Christianity, like, it's been kind of proven over time, like there's nothing new under the sun. Someone's going to come up and have a new framework to address it, and they're going to code it in a different way, a different argument of why Bitcoin's wrong. But it's the same, it's the FUD dice. It's the same thing that people cycle through.
I think it's a great analogy. And, again, nothing to be, we're just spitballing here. And this is the whole point, right? Like, one of the reasons why humility is not only necessary, I always framed it this way: these people that come in and they didn't have very much humility around, what was going on. And then they were turned away at the gates by the mean cyber hornets or something like that.
Just annihilated.
Right. And my thing was always, first of all, if your quest for truth is genuine, you ain't getting turned back by a couple of meanies on the internet.
Right.
I'm sorry, I'm not buying that. So you obviously you're not genuine in your pursuit here. But in terms of the humility, like, I think that's part of what inspires this voracious search for more insight wherever they may be held to apply to this thing. And because it's so unknown, and encompassing a full understanding of it, even if that's even possible, requires such a humility that it extends your curiosity almost out toward everything, right? Whereas the opposite of humility would say, oh no, I don't need to explore here, and here, because this thing is in a nice contained box that I can easily comprehend. And, you mentioned, we're talking about very big subjects here, and obviously I hope my musings on it don't insult your faith or anything like that. But you could say that, like, God is love, God is truth, God is the source of meaning, and therefore a relationship to that is a genuine relationship to that is imbued with those things, right? It kind of comes from those places. And I'm not equating Bitcoin to God, but I think that the fact that it ascends the value hierarchy for people, at least in relation to how they value their time, their energy, their visions of the future, and how much as an instrument, how much meaning is imbued in it for what it may be able to foster in terms of an individual's life and humanity and the future. Like I think there's an interesting relationship that develops there that is not dissimilar, if not in kind, but in how like a certain transmission takes place from the entity or the idea into the individual. Right. I don't know if that wasn't articulated super well.
I follow, and I don't take issue with that at all. So, you have this whole argument gets cycled around with like the toxic maximalists and people who are like, hey, we want to be as loving and kind as possible. So, your maximalists they will kick down in, hey, like basically, hey, we're not going to debate this idea because we've debated it 100 times. Like, and these people are like, well, that's not very kind and loving way to behave. Man, that same thing goes on within churches, right? So your far right wing would be, so there's an author or a pastor in New York called Tim Keller, and he's like, God is truth and love, and so truth is harsh, and so Christ spoke and he said some harsh stuff. And, the Oprah, Christianity of the world, the love element is all they highlight is just like, oh, how accepting and loving and all these things. Like, we're going to kind of flip over all that like judgmental stuff in the Bible, like ignore it. And these people may only highlight the judgmental element, but really, and it seems like a contradiction, but God is both of these things. Like, like he hands out some very hard truths, but he does it in a loving way. And I think in the same right within the Bitcoin community, and like I take no issue with the toxic maximalists. Like if I had a more of an online presence, that's what I'd probably be. I'm like, dude, we've debated this like multiple times. Like, please just go away. And so you do have this weird balance, and like, hey, well, we need the freedom to be able to evaluate this. And I get the toxic side saying like, guys, like, all you're doing is you're creating a distraction for a bunch of people who are trying to find their way, very much like Christianity. I mean, like these people are trying to find their way in the world, and you're polluting it with like, you're polluting their mind with doubt. And Philip Morris, the cigarette company, they're I think it was McKesson or Kinsey, whatever, one of these companies, when they were getting all this information was coming about cigarettes being carcinogenic, right? That it causes lung cancer. And so Philip Morris had their doctors, their surgeons go in and look at this, and their experts come back and say, yeah, man, like it's pretty clear, like the science is clear, like smoking causes cancer. And they're like, damn, so we can't say it doesn't cause cancer? They're like, no, you can't say that. They're like, but what if we said maybe it doesn't cause cancer? Like, you're just creating doubt. And it's a way for them to get their nose under the tent. And so they knew forever, that this caused it, but they started writing articles that say, maybe there's other causes, maybe there's other things. Like, and so I think in the same way, I'm off on a tangent, but in the same way within Bitcoin, you get people who well, maybe these other things will work and maybe they will. I don't know. It dilutes what the truth is, hey, this kills. I don't know. Stop me.
No. I know what you're saying. And not that I think they're mutually exclusive, truth and kindness, right? They can obviously be wrapped up together very often. But to me, it comes down to what's the greatest respect you can pay to a person? In my opinion, it is the truth. It's not kindness. Yeah. Because and obviously the truth can be subjective. It's what you believe to be the truth. It may not be a broader objective truth. Right. But, again, going back to these definitions of God, like if God is the truth of the structure of reality, God is the truth about how consciousness interacts with reality, right? Like, would you rather know the truth of that, even if it's discomforting or counter to your previously held notion? Or would you rather the edges be rounded and softened because it's more comfortable? And I mean, again, the analogy to fiat world versus Bitcoin world is perfect here, because the fiat world, you get to act as though there's no consequences. Consequences get rounded out, but really they don't get eliminated, they get pushed elsewhere, right? Because you cannot ultimately avoid them. Whereas Bitcoin makes consequences, or a world predicated on a money like Bitcoin causes you to confront consequences more face on. And that ultimately is beneficial, though it may be discomforting in the moment. And I think when we talk about truth and kindness, I mean, in my life, it's always been the case. You do me a greater respect by telling me the truth, not telling me what I want to hear. 100%. I'd rather have the truth, and one of the kind of, not mantras, but things I have always said to myself for many years is I'd rather be tormented by the truth than coddled by ignorance, because the truth is going to aid me in constructing the type of person and life that I ultimately want to become. The nice, comforting words aren't going to do anything for me. They're gonna, if anything, they're going to push me further into delusion. And I want to get out of delusion and into a greater clarity of what is.
Yeah, it's like you see that with addicts, right? Like, how does a family deal with an addict? Like, are you going to do the hard? That's why, because these are your children. Your child is suffering from an addiction. Like, you can love them all you want, but it may kill them, right? And you've done the right, you've done the kind thing, but it ultimately killed them. And a hard truth, is ultimately going to be what they need to flourish, or cut ties. So. Yeah.
I think just a couple more for you, man, and then I'll let you go. But do you think, well, two things. I mean, the line of work you're in, and again, I don't know how much you want to go into this, but I'm kind of thinking there might be a lot of work because of the current thing happening in the next year, 2, 3, 5, whatever it ends up being, because you're probably just as aware of the type of injuries occurring as I am, and I suspect that'll be an issue at some point. But the other thing is, has the last 2 years, as you said, how Bitcoin has started to reshape your perception, has that caused any desire or change in how you approach your career, and like any thinkings about how you might move forward with it?
Yeah, it kind of fits it. I think I'm a person with some pretty very conservative leanings, but again, I work in a really progressive profession, and so my colleagues are like, I can't believe you're conservative. My conservative friends are like, I can't believe that you're a plaintiff's attorney. So I think it's contrarian in its nature. But to your point about will this turn into what's going to happen? I've had plenty of people reach out to me, people, the basic stuff of like, hey man, I'm going to lose my job if I don't get this. Do I have any? Well, Texas is a right to work state. Like, man, unfortunately, you don't have any recourse. And, will this turn into, I think, and again, I have not really researched it, but to my understanding, they have massive liability waivers on this. So will they ever, will there be an accounting for people that suffered a heart trauma, heart attack, died? And I don't think there will be. I genuinely don't. I think people have so lost their minds with this that, man, when you have the very profession that goes after these companies kowtowing as it relates to this, and I don't think there won't be an accounting. It's crazy. Yeah.
Well, I mean, and it's such a massive industry. I mean, even before all this,
oh my gosh,
that government in many ways is captured, at least as far as I can tell, by the obscene money that this industry can throw out and capture members of government with, So again, this conversation doesn't happen in the public, but if you care to look, it's obviously there.
Right. Yeah, I think the hypocrisy on from both left and right, obviously the right in this country has been very protective of the pharmaceutical companies, in the left very critical, and then on this one issue they've completely flip-flopped. where, you know, the right is now like, man, these pharmaceutical companies are making a profit, and they're like, well, guys, this is what they've been doing. This is how they operate, you know. And the left saying, well, they're, you know, they have our best intentions at heart. Like, guys, like we've known that they haven't. And, you know, being able to recognize that. And I think that, again, to me, I start with the premise, and just like, you know, of very much the Reformed faith of like sin nature. Like, we are all deeply hypocritical and have massive blind spots, but, you know, and we don't know what they are. That's why they're called blind spots, right? And, you know, with having an inquisitive and like the Socratic mind to walk through presumptions you have, and this is very much a Bitcoin thing of like, why, just continuously asking why, and peeling back the onion on things. And yeah, it has changed friendships in a way of, okay, to your point of, there's an author named John Eldridge. He wrote a book called Wild at Heart, and it was a Christian book, but the framework is, I think, you know, people would call it toxic masculinity. He was like, look, the church has emasculated men over the years, and, you know, every man needs a dragon to slay. Every bride wants a knight in shining armor. And so we've lost that sense of it. And so when I talk to people about Bitcoin, and they say, that's just pie in the sky, like, you're talking about something like, you're talking about unwinding the very fabric of society that we're built upon. And I'm like, yes, I am.
Yes.
Of course. Like, you don't want to go do this? Like, and they're like, oh, it just seems like a lot of work, you know, just like, it's so hard. I'm like, dude, you and I are not going to be in a foxhole together. And yeah, like, you want to be around people that have like grand ambitions, and like, who doesn't want to, like, you know, wield a sword and like try to do good. Yeah, man, like what we aspire to do and what we think this can be is like, it's fucking huge. It's awesome. Who don't want to be a part of that? Like,
exactly.
It's adventure. Where's your sense of like, come on, man?
It's the greatest call to adventure perhaps ever, the greatest hero's journey ever. And to your point about this masculinity thing, I mean, again, I think our disconnection from the meaning and sacrifice and other things that constitute the world, very much, let's say, promoted by the fiat system, has disconnected us from elements of our nature that have served us in the past and that are very, very important, but have been nullified by this system. So I don't think it's a surprise to see an emerging, like a revivification of both masculinity and femininity in like amongst the Bitcoin culture, if I can call it that, because it's a renewed. People look at it with these things with renewed eyes. They reconstruct what it means to them, and then they try to integrate what they find into their own life. And what do you know? These kind of like, you know, archaic or traditional or archaic's the wrong word because it has a negative connotation, but like a reappreciation for the differences between men and women and the value that they uniquely have, and how together they constitute something greater than the sum of its parts, culminating perhaps in life and family, etc. And that's the most important thing there is.
100%.
Right.
And the complementary nature of man and woman to produce flourishing. Like, it's biblical. It's just like, it is what it is. And I think every system of faith coalesces around that, of like, that is what life is. And that's the only way for life to advance. You know, and
it's been maligned. It's been both maligned, and because of the pressures and anxieties that the fiat system imposes, the constant deprivation through the siphoning away of wealth and savings and security has disincentivized, you know, that whole process, right? Not only just expression of masculinity and femininity, but the disincentivized bringing more humans into the world, because there's a cost associated with it, and people are less and less perhaps willing to bear that cost. And if, of course, if they do anyways, if they do, let's say, irresponsibly, the environment that is created for, you know, those new humans entering the world is not ideal, right? And I think this is again why we talk about the strong families a lot in this space, right? And what that means. And again, we're going to take all the stuff from traditional definitions, and hopefully we're going to add something unique, you know, something that Bitcoin allows us to access for the first time. And again, what's more exciting than that? What's more important than that?
Yeah. No, I mean, like, and again, people that wouldn't want to get on board with that, you're just like, man, like, I thought we had a lot in common. I don't know that we have a lot in common with you, dude. Like, yeah, I mean, I like, there's a group of guys that I met, like, I've got to be good buddies with a guy out of Dallas that we're on a text chain now together, an older guy out of Houston who's, fat, hyper smart, but, once you find like-minded people, like I'm on a text chain with these guys who, like, I've only met at a conference, and like we're texting constantly with one another because there is just, you want to be around people who share and who aspire to these things. And that's why it's an inspiring community.
Yeah, the conferences are so great because you're kind of on the same wavelength with people and you connect immediately. Patrick, I'm going to let you go. I got to ask this one last one. You take as much time as you need to answer it. But has learning about Bitcoin, and because you're in the legal profession, has it changed your opinion, appreciation, respect for the law in any way, in how law is constituted, the role it plays in society, that kind of thing? I know it's not necessarily a short question, but take it for whatever you like.
Yeah, man, I think I don't have a good answer for that. I think I don't know that it like I'm way more cynical about things. Look, I think the law favors wealth, and the law is, and I've known this, like, just implicitly within what we do. And I think Bitcoin has given an answer to questions that I had about why is there this disparity in the law, and look at so I think this is a good eye opener for people like me, like the Rittenhouse trial. A lot of us were like, God, man, this seems so unjust. Like, the video is very clear. Even like very progressive, like criminal defense attorneys would be like, that kid never should have been charged. And they're like, but you need to realize, guys, like, you're like, lucky for this kid, it's a high profile case and people gave a lot of money. Like, this stuff happens all the time, and it doesn't end well. And these people, so it's really punitive. Like, the wealth disparity is very punitive in the legal system for plaintiffs going up against large corporations, for criminal defendants who are up against the state, and the state wields a ton of power. And to Peterson's point about, like, you want the person who wields the sword to have the ability, like, to have the demeanor to, like, sheath the sword, like, right. And not wield it unjustly. And so yeah, I mean, it has reaffirmed my view that, like, they're within the law, that, like, the fiat system has infected the law from those with means and those without means. And you look at the way bank fines, all this is within the legal structure, and those with means, like, they're going to do well. Those without means, it's like disproportionately punitive to those without means. So yeah, I mean, like, it has absolutely infected that, and there's just that any attorney would tell you that.
Yeah, I always thought that quote from Peterson was great. I think he got it. His interpretation of the meek shall inherit the earth is not that the weak shall inherit the earth, but those who know how to wield their swords but keep them sheathed will be the ones that inherit the earth. And again, I mean, this is why I think, again, there's this ethos of being formidable within Bitcoin. It's like, be formidable in your finances, in your body, in your health, in your family, in every way, and then use your force as judiciously as possible. Right. That's the best way to construct a life and a culture and a civilization. And I'm hoping that in the future that we're headed towards, there'll be less of what you just described and more, I guess, of what I just described. So, that's part of the journey we're all on. Patrick, this has been super fun, man. I'm sure we could go on for hours, and hopefully we will sometime, but I know you got a day to attend to, so I'll let you go for now. Was there any last words anywhere you wanted to direct anybody or anything like that?
No, man. I don't have a big presence online, I would just like point your friends to like good resources, help them through the altcoin casino and quickly. And again, there's way more resources than there used to be 2 or 3 years ago for good content. So man, John, I really appreciate what you do. So thank you so much. I appreciate your time. Happy Thanksgiving.
All right, brother. Happy Thanksgiving. Take care.
Yeah,